Well, hello, and thank you for logging in for this event. I see there are still some people logging in here. My name is Sandra Best. I'm the Executive Director for Wastewater Education. We are hosting this event in conjunction with Jake O'Brien there in a long way away in Australia. You will see the panel of speakers there. And at this point, I am going to mute my audio and stop my video feed and let you start your event here. If you need to get hold of me, please use the chat window. Take it away, Ben.
Hello, welcome to an on-site wastewater networking event here in Australia. And these are rare. They're as rare as hen's teeth. As an industry, we have not been networking, engaging with stakeholders, having discussions about any part of our industry for over a decade now. So the whole aim of this afternoon's event is basically to get people talking in the Australian industry and about on-site wastewater and decentralised wastewater. And as part of helping us along with the discussion, we've got a collection of international guests to talk about what's going on in the United States, in Canada, in Ireland, and the European Union. And I'm afraid to say, what's going on internationally is a lot more exciting than what's going on in Australia. We've got Ben Asquith here from Decentralized Water, and we're having a chat this morning that basically between about 1998 2009 was the golden age of on-site wastewater discussions here in Australia. We had NOSIG, the National On-Site Special Interest Group, Dr. Bob Patterson and Malcolm Jones had the on-site series of conferences at Armidale, so 99, 01, 03, 05, 07, and then it all went away very slowly, but by now it very much has gone away. The only organisation still having conferences, meaningful conferences focusing on on-site decentralised wastewater in Australia is Curravilla Matthews, Martin Ander, magic crew over there at Murdoch University. And if it wasn't for them having a conference every 4 or so years, there'd be absolutely nothing. And for those of you who are interested, Curavilla's got his conference on over in Perth next week through the International Water Association. Registrations are still open. It would be fantastic if you could come along and have a chat there. But it has been a bit sad here in the Australian on-site industry. A lot of the mentors that we had, so Bob Patterson, Lee Davidson, Joe Whitehead, Phil Geary, Lee Davidson, who I think I might have mentioned, Robert Vandergraaf, Ted Gardner, yep, either retired or semi-retired, heading out, and the next generation of mentors coming through is a bit sparse, and the number of postgraduate students who are coming through and universities actively engaged in on-site wastewater has significantly decreased. Like the old on-site conferences, you would have 40 or so papers in there from postgraduate students actively researching on-site wastewater, decentralised wastewater. And I'm struggling to think of half a dozen projects which are currently underway in Australia, which is sad. Now, it might be that our networking is so bad that there are projects underway at the moment that we're just not aware of. So the whole aim of this webinar today is basically to get the conversations going, because as much as I dislike motivational videos or any of these types of things, where you happen to have the misfortune to have a look at one and they say how an industry should be vibrant, engage its stakeholders and do all these things to be successful in the modern world, I think the Australian on-site wastewater industry is doing sweet bugger all in regards to any of them. So yeah, this is a bit of an opportunity for us to have an event and have a discussion. Tomorrow we're out at the Woodford Folk Festival site having an open day between 10 to 2 for those people in Queensland who can still come along. Thursday, we're down in Adelaide having a tour through the Clare Valley, looking at on-site and decentralised installations through there, thanks to the Environmental Health Association. And the following week, we're at Perth with Murdoch University and the International Water Association's conference. So this is as vibrant as our industry's been in years. So I'm encouraging everybody to get involved. We've got the chat open. If you've got questions, things that you want to talk about, get involved in, please do. We'll be responding. I'm actually chasing some interesting questions, feedback. It's not going to really worry me if you put something controversial up to discuss. We're not going to be offended. So on that note, we'll start off with a few presentations from our international guests. First cab off the rank is Dr. Sarah Hager from the University of Minnesota. Be nice to Sarah, it's her birthday today. So Sarah's the immediate past president of NARA over in the United States and is going to talk to us a bit about what she's passionate with in the on-site wastewater industry. Take it away, Sarah.
Well, hello, everybody. And I first just want to thank Ben for gathering us together. It's always one of my favorite things to talk about is decentralized wastewater treatment. So the fact that I get to do it in Australia probably is the best opportunity I've had to do it. So Ben asked us to talk about something we're passionate about. And he mentioned I work at the University of Minnesota doing education and research all about decentralized systems. But I'm also, as you mentioned, the past president of NARA, and I've actually been involved with NARA pretty much my entire career. And as Ben was getting at, the lack of networking and an association here to bring people together. If we didn't have that in the US, I wouldn't know most of the people I know. I wouldn't have the connections I have. I would never have met Ben if NARA didn't exist. So NARA has really, and the great thing is NARA has been, in the last particularly 5 years, has been super active and is moving things, I think, really forward. But what I'm going to talk to you quickly about today is about a research scanning project that we undertook. And this really came from when we reached out to our federal regulators in the US, and I can almost assume this issue is the same in Australia. We asked them why our sector of the wastewater industry wasn't getting funding. And the director of the water and wastewater program said, well, if we gave you money, what would you do research about? And my answer is, well, it depends who you ask, right? So we then decided to undertake a research scanning project to look at really what are the needs. And certainly the outcomes of this, most of the respondents were people in the US, but I don't think that you'll find most of the issues that came up are US specific. So if you're not aware of horizon scanning, just a little bit of background. And the biggest thing about this is we didn't just ask a bunch of academics, what do you think research should be? We asked the entire industry. So it was a very inherently bottom-up exercise. The goal, again, is not to find little niche issues that we need research about, but it's like, what are the big research questions that are facing our industry that are stopping us from moving forward? So the name, again, for the now R2 is the needs for on-site wastewater recycling research. There was a steering committee with diverse representation. We followed established survey and workshop synthesis methods. So it really started with an online survey that went to a broad group. Then we had a synthesis workshop, and we're currently in phase 3, but you're gonna get the highlights of the outcomes here today. Just a little bit about who responded to the survey. I thought this was really interesting, and it really gets at where our industry is at, is that most people have been doing this a while. You can see, again, the greatest respondents was more than 30 years, which, you know, one of our challenges is the less than 5 years, which will come up a little bit later in the demographic information. So who your employer. So most respondents work in business, government, and you'll see the smallest, not necessarily the smallest, but the smallest of the big groups was actually academia. So really the respondents, and that really represents who NARA represents. The biggest group of people who are represented by NARA are installers, not people who sit at, who are running research programs. So this actually shows then the type of respondents. So you'll see engineer, environmental health, installer, designer. So we didn't necessarily get our biggest group to respond, but you'll see a very kind of broad group of people did fill out this survey, which was what we wanted. We wanted to make sure we were capturing the industry overall. The other thing that we asked about was professional registration and credentials. And this is I would say an ongoing problem that we face certainly in the US. And that is that many people that are working in this really aren't certified or trained specifically around the topic. And many of this goes to local jurisdictional requirements for registration or certification that just don't exist across many of our states. And certainly when you look broadly across the United States, there's the only one of these that exists across the US is a sanitarian. And most regulators are not sanitarians, which is under the National Environmental Health Association. I also thought this one was super interesting, so I left it in. Do you plan to retire in the next 5 years? Yeah, sign me up too. I'm moving to New Zealand, right? So, but I thought this was super interesting to think about our industry, that almost 40% of the people that filled out this survey said they were going to retire in the next 5 years. It's crazy. So a couple other results that came out of education and training that before we get into the real research needs, there's this decline. We have aging workforce and retirements. Recruitment of early professionals is something that's really limited. There's a shortage of education and training programs. And we really are struggling to have university-led programs that are really sending out people into the field who know little to anything about decentralized systems. That's very limited. So with that, I'm just going to move on to what were the key research findings. And I did tell Ben to not let me go over 10 minutes because I could have talked about this for a half an hour. So I really picked the kind of the big themes that came out of this as far as what do we need more information about. So to get this information, we asked professionals 2 questions. So what research question, if answered, would substantially advance the science? And that's, again, the science part of it, but we know often, I always say we can get water as clean as we need it, but some of the problem isn't about the technology, it's also about the management. So that was the second question, is what environmental management research question, if answered, would substantially advance the practice of decentralized wastewater treatment? So these were the outcomes. So what you'll see at the top is the questions kind of went into big buckets. So the first bucket was things and topics and questions around treatment, performance, and resource recovery. So the first one you'll see is how can we develop on-site systems that can be implemented and interface with broader circular economies while maintaining effectiveness and reliability across different economic conditions and geographic regions. The second question, how can we develop effective, efficient, and economically viable treatment approaches with resource recovery? So thinking about nutrients and septage and you'll see this is targeting diverse beneficial reuse applications. And the last one is really looking at kind of more emerging issues. How can we adapt, develop, and validate robust treatment approaches that are effective for things like PFAS, pharmaceuticals, for various water reuse applications. So the second bucket was around resiliency, efficiency, and sustainability. So what innovation is needed related to decentralized systems to increase effluent quality and social acceptance for water reuse? Can we demonstrate how to implement decentralized systems to enhance resiliency, considering climate change, natural disaster, and economic challenges? And lastly, what innovation is needed related to on-site systems to increase effluent quality? Oh, that's the same as the first one, I apologize. All right, so the third bucket was environmental quality and public health. So what is the quantifiable role and relative contributions of decentralized wastewater compared to other contaminant sources? So this is, again, thinking more about, that big scale, how do we really fit in? Because I often know we are sometimes the ones pointed at when we're often a small piece of the overall problem. How does climate or other extreme weather impact operation and maintenance? What contribution of emerging contaminants from on-site wastewater systems are we really impacting groundwater in the US? So under implementation, what incentives are effective for better on-site wastewater installation and management? So how do we encourage more of our states to actually certify people or for homeowners to manage their systems? How do you develop regional asset management? I mean, we have many jurisdictions that don't even know how many decentralized systems they have. They have no way to track them, to manage them. And how do we make responsible management economically viable? The last bucket is really just emerging issues that really came out of the survey. So I think just like here across the US and Canada, we've seen a lot more wildfire issues. That's been a challenge. The second one, again, also something that's international water shortage is really driving higher quality treatment for reclamation or reuse. We have a lot of communities that are being impacted by climate change, particularly coastal areas dealing with saltwater intrusion, storm surges, precipitation. That's a challenge. We see regional, national shortages around material, really driving up system costs substantially. And if you add that into a lot of our communities that simply are underserved and really don't have the economic means, it's gotten even worse. And that's really the last one. There's an inequity of funding between centralized and decentralized, and we've never addressed it. We know in the US that, less than 1% of the federal funds that have ever been allocated to wastewater resources have actually gone to decentralized, when we know the number's a little off, but 20 to 25% of people who pay taxes in the US are served with a decentralized system, but have never been able to tap into any of those resources. So those are some of the challenges. There are certainly more, but I just wanted to hit some of the highlights. I think as an industry, we've come a long way. And the purpose of this exercise was to point out that a lot of the research that we use as the basis for our systems and implementation was gathered around when I was being born. Which Ben asked me how old I am. I'm almost 50. So let's just say 50 years ago was when a lot of the fundamental research, and have we made some strides? Yeah, but there was a huge investment at that time into really figuring out some of the science, but we really haven't had that same concerted effort to continue to move our industry forward. We kind of had piecemeal approaches, but we're hoping that, the results of this, when published, are something we can take to stakeholders and funders to really help our industry continue to move forward in really recycling water back into the environment safely.
Thank you, Sarah. Just quickly, well, I'll start off with a few questions and I'll get Dendra to let us know with those ones there in the chat if there's anything pressing from the audience. But do you think one of the reasons why we're bad at lobbying is that as an industry, we're decentralized? Because here in Australia, I see how well Sydney Water does and Melbourne Water does, and the bigger water utilities, SA Water, they've got 1 million people, 2 million people, 4 million people in a small area. And yeah, they just seem so much more effective at their lobbying than what we do, where here in Australia, it's maybe 2.5, 3 million people which are in the industry, which is bigger than some of these organisations, much bigger, which are better at lobbying than us. But we're spread out and we don't talk to each other. I know that NARA has started going to Congress every year.
Yeah.
Has that had an impact?
So I was just going to say, so the key thing is all the organizations you just mentioned have lobbyists.
Yeah.
So they have someone knocking on doors saying, we need money, we need help, we have aging infrastructure, right? Well, they do too, right? Yeah. And they can use up that money so quickly, with a couple centralized projects. So yeah, so NARA, and it's been more than 5 years, but I would say in that 5 to 10 year range is when we first hired a lobbyist. But the thing about lobbying is it takes time. Like, you're basically building relationships and getting them to really understand our industry. We do regular fly-ins. And with COVID, you know, the nice thing is actually they went online. So, but reaching out and continuing to remind them how important our industry is. The other, either good or bad, there's been a lot of recent, in the last couple of years, negative attention about many of our underserved populations that has actually raised the issue with Congress, which in the end ends up being helpful. It's always a double-edged sword when people literally have zero sanitation and they're the poster child for our industry. It's a little hard, but I would say the overall outcome has been that now we have more people at a federal level understanding and coming to this agreement, like everyone deserves clean water or sanitation, which is really, and those two things to me are directly related, because if you don't have proper sanitation, you don't have water. But I do think the other challenge I think that is that a lot of our businesses in the decentralized are small operations. So they don't have the time and energy also to sometimes dedicate to maybe paying for a lobbyist or being part of that, but also just their time. I think, you know, when I think about the average business, it's 1 to 5 people, right? In a decentralized business. And so they don't have sometimes the capacity. So that's why, again, I think having a national organization really does help, because then you could have someone whose dedicated job is to do that and then to call in the people when needed. Because our lobbyist always says they don't want to hear from me, but they have to make the connections, because for the most part, we don't have the time and energy to do it.
Now, you've got states which have got more on-site wastewater installations than what there are entirely in Australia. So Florida, California, even New York State, I think, has got more on-site installations than what there are here in Australia. We'd be the equivalent of a mid-sized state. How do those mid-sized state organisations go as underneath NARA? So as
right, so all the funding that NARA has been effective at getting is then implemented on a state level. So even if the state has less numbers, so we have basically loan and grant programs that are still administered on a state level, and then states also have additional funding that's available. So we certainly, so the state I live in is one of the states that really has had and particularly from the federal money that comes down, has been really effective at giving that out to decentralize. The problem is that you still have to face on a state by state basis, convincing then state regulators to take this pool of infrastructure money and dedicate it to decentralized, or to allow decentralized projects to even apply for the money. And some states don't allow it. So we still face that barrier, and the federal government will not earmark it.
Now, in my mind, you and Anish are absolute legends, right? Because you're university researchers that have postgraduate students coming through who are also doing training programs and going out into the wider industry and getting these training programs out there. How many other people like you are out there doing this work in the United States? Because, you know, like there's Joe Whitehead left here in Australia in the Centre for Environmental Training, but there is sweet bugger all else.
I would say about half the states have and most of the states, it is often tied, I hate to say it, because we don't have it, NARA doesn't have an affiliate in all of our states. And sometimes it's population based. So just to the west of me, the Dakotas, Montana, Wyoming, it's just they're really low population based states. So they don't have a state association and they don't have a university led program, but a lot of the bigger states do.
Can I have
go for it.
So one of the things that I would say in the US, all this recognition of the on-site system started with EPA recognizing the fact that decentralized will be the part of national wastewater infrastructure. There was a report to Congress in 1997, and that opened up. So once the United States EPA said that we're not going to sewer the whole country, now on-site is the legitimate wastewater infrastructure. So people realize that sewer will never come. And that triggered funding mechanism for grant programs and things like that. So it takes time.
Yes, sorry,
I
go,
just gonna
Jared.
make some of it. Do you find, like I have a division in the US, we have a division in Canada, and I'm finding in the US, like we're running into scenarios where regulatory inconsistencies are becoming a big impact.
Yeah.
Maybe this state has this, but the municipal has this, but the national is this. EPA provides different standards. We actually had a scenario just recently where we contacted a lobbyist group because they were in some serious trouble with things like fish kills and phosphorus loading and algal blooms and all this in this lake, and it was very expensive homes. And so we contacted them, look, we have the opportunity to maybe have a discussion, see if we can find some kind of solutions. And they said, oh, well, no, we're a lobby group. We're not allowed to make any decisions. Our funding is just to allow us to be a lobby group. And then we take suggestions to the municipal, and the municipal will then decide if there's any funding to do the actual work, which shocked me. So we don't have that in Canada. When it's a, you have an issue and it's a regulatory issue. They now, as of 2011, their first $1 million fine happened. And now we're seeing fines as high as $70 million.
Dendra, I can see that there's questions in the chat and the Q&A, but I haven't got control.
I'm just gonna say the inconsistency in regulatory in the US is a huge challenge. And it really came from because EPA there are no, unless you're surface discharging, there are no national standards for decentralized systems in the US. So it is state by state. So you're facing, well, except for Michigan, that doesn't have a state code.
Oh, no, let's not drag Michigan into that.
I couldn't help it.
So Dendra, I can't see the chats or the Q&A.
Yeah.
Can you pull them up for us and we'll discuss some of those so that
we
people
can
don't
see.
feel being-
Yeah, you have a couple of Q&A questions from Ted Gardner.
I am not surprised.
How realistic is effluent reuse from an on-site system? Usually it requires a membrane filter and a UV filter, etc. And his second question is, how important is nutrient removal for on-site systems for environmental protection? Trace organics removal usually require lots of treatment, e.g. BIC, AOP. So do you want to take them separately or together?
Yeah, whichever way we want to go on that one. So actual purpose for water recycling from on-site decentralized systems. I know that I'm doing it here in Australia, and Ben from Decentralized Systems is doing it as well. There is a lot of disposal hidden away as recycled water as well. What's going on with recycled water in
Wow.
Lawrence, you hear from Ireland, what's going on there?
In terms of the reuse of
Yeah.
I only work on on-site, small, single house on-site systems, and yeah, I think it's kind of thought of as disposal, but I think of it as groundwater recharge.
Yep.
But the nutrient issue is significant, particularly for phosphorus in Ireland and in the freshwater systems, and then nitrogen in the estuaries. And in Ireland, because we're in the EU, everything is viewed against the Water Framework Directive. So every source of contaminant has to be kind of identified, and then there has to be active measures taken to try to reduce that. So over the past 10, 12 years, there's been a big program by the EPA in terms of trying to quantify on a catchment basis where all the different inputs are, particularly nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and then they're going through this whole programs and measures business now where they've identified the hotspots and nutrients. They're now going in to get people, particularly it's mainly kind of farmers, to be honest with you, but not exclusively, to improve their inputs into rivers. So I'll talk about it in a minute, but in Ireland, the pathway for on-site effluent is to groundwater. There's no surface water discharge allowed. And so our aim is to, remove all the nutrients, but most of them by the time it gets down to the groundwater level, which then will feed the rivers.
So in US with the NSF 245, which is strictly for individual home reuse system. So now there are technologies, they will produce indirect particle reuse, toilet flushing. So in Texas, I got state funding to test some of those in the real world applications. And what we are finding is we're recommending that you got to add some more polishing And then we can easily bring this water back into for toilet flushing, which is about 20-30%. So I see an uptake, and I'm getting more funding for reuse research in Texas.
In Canada, we're actually have the Canadian regulations that we have to follow under the Health Canada Act. So we're looking at having to reach, less than 10 BOD is one of the key factors that they have there. If you can reach that, then you can reuse it to a point. You have you're less than 100 CFU, et cetera. But what they want to look at is purple piping systems are all put in place so that we're not integrating, and then we're isolating which types of water that we're using. So where you're going to have a really high level of organic materials such as kitchen sinks from traps and things like that are meshing up things like a lot of the vegetables and materials and stuff. They're saying, well, maybe that's not the way to go, but maybe we can reuse our water from our showers or water from. So they're kind of looking at what that's to be done. They are looking at aerosolized pathogens. I was on a board for a number of years that was identifying that with actually Dr. Nick Ashwell. It's out of the Southern Cross University here in Australia. So they are looking at the advantages of it and decentralized systems that can apply to that. As far as taking nutrient loading out, we're finding we've actually developed technology that reduces phosphorus very easily down to non-detect. So that phosphorus load is the big one that we're going to focus on and stuff when I have a little chat here. But one of the things that is you just have to make sure you're doing the right science. There's too many things that are coming out and saying, oh, we can do this, we can do that. But then when you start looking into the science of it, we're not hitting those numbers.
Are you honestly telling me I can't believe the marketing?
Yes. No matter.
Sarah, you got
so I live in the land of 10,000 lakes, so reuse is very low right now. So I think we have to think about there are climates where reuse and we can't grow things for half of the year. So reuse is harder on an individual, particularly home scale in many climates. And if you are water rich, reuse, the economics of it get pretty difficult. So where I think across the US, we see driving issues for reuse are in our more arid climates, because the fact of the matter is gray water production exceeds toilet flushing. So you have to have somewhere for the water to go. I mean, and that's good, right? We don't want people using lots of water to flush their toilets. So that is the challenge around reuse at the single family home scale. So if you were going to ask me, I think it's easier to implement reuse, particularly when you start talking about adding polishing or disinfection on a larger, and when I still think it's decentralized, but on a slightly larger scale, the economics, the ability to use the water on the landscape, it just gets a lot more feasible when you have clusters of homes together or commercial properties. So that's where I really think we'll see more reuse in the future. And you'll always have homeowners or special homeowners who are going to be interested. But if you really look at it on that scale, I also think the management is so much more important when you start talking about reuse. And so it's often hard for many regulatory programs to have single family home enforcement of management. But when you start talking about commercial and cluster, and that management piece gets easier. On the nutrient side, certainly also depends where you live, right? So we definitely see nitrogen and phosphorus both being something that we're going to see more regulations and more systems that are going to have to employ that treatment level. We can't assume in all of our soils and site conditions that we're going to naturally get it. It just doesn't happen. So I think we will see a lot more systems in the future that are going to require additional nitrogen and phosphorus treatment.
By the way, there's a comment for this. I'm just reading the comment from Water Environment Federation. Yes, they are working. That group also helps at the national level because they're the big.
WEFTEC and they've run themes on it in recent years.
Absolutely.
So that's been fantastic as well. Very few Australians go to WEFTEC, but it's a fantastic, and it's in New Orleans next year, which is
Chicago,
a wonderful place to go. Who's got the mouse?
Can I just ask a quick question? Can you see the webinar chat now?
Yeah.
Did you
Scroll down.
Yeah, we can see it. We're just looking to scroll down, but at the same time, we're going to take that 15-second pause for silence so that we can swap over to Jerry. And Jerry's going to give us a Canadian perspective.
Yeah, one of the comments from Troy was pointing out that Health Canada has published a guideline document endorsing water reuse. So,
Yeah, there's certain.
That 350 standard.
okay, I'm going to mute.
All right.
Righty-go. So next up we have Jerry, and it's all right, Dendra will be able to work it out from there. So Jerry's the CEO of the Clearflow Group, which is a company not just in Canada but in the US with agents in Brazil, United Kingdom and Australia as well. So Jerry's working internationally. We've got to be nice to Jerry because he's just flown into Australia this morning. He's horrifically jet lagged, and where he's a chemist, we've taken him to very exciting chemistry labs all day, and we've worn him out. So we've got him on early this afternoon, just in case he falls asleep when the rest of us are talking. So please take it away, Jerry.
I'll try not to do that while in mid-discussion, and more so a process guy than the chemistry, but yes, we've really been looking, and our focus has been saying, speak to what you're passionate about. One of the things that we've developed is a specific environmentally friendly format and formulations for passive removal of TSS, metals, and certain nutrients such as phosphorus. It's been a real focus for us in Canada because we're getting highly eutrophic conditions. We're getting a lot of I guess subdivisions and those type of things that are being built around major water bodies, and they're having all of this, not only the groundwater, but also the septic water getting into these facilities, and it's causing a lot of problems. So we've just finished some major research projects with the Federal Municipal Corporation and Canada with some grants to the tune of a few $1 million. And proving out that we could take phosphorus out in both the level of, and dissolved and total formats, and also start reducing things like the nutrient loading from CSOs. We're doing projects in the UK on that right now, and basically taking and providing a pure water for either reuse or release back into the environment. But with the understanding that all of our science is based around aquatic toxicology. So what's the receiving water like? We test rainbow trout, we test diaphragm magnet, we're testing fathead minnows. So we're constantly in research making sure that we're being safe for the environment. Probably the bulk of our business is in mining. So we really have highly environmentally sensitive areas with high potential for fines. And that's why I was asking about the regulatory side, because you have one release at a mine and you've got problems that you will never get rid of, and they will close the mines. So municipal is just starting to catch up in Canada. I would say we're further ahead in the US, because in our US side, we're now, after being located in the US since 2020, we are now getting the municipal on side. So California has come on in a big way. We actually had a little bit of a laugh in that Washington State, which is probably one of the hardest states to get approved up next to California, had contacted us, said you need to follow all of these protocols and all of this science to make sure that you can qualify for being approved in our state. And my assistant phoned me up and said, oh, well, this is what they need to do. I said, well, if you look at that data is from 2009, and it's our data that they wrote all of their rules and regulations on. So I called them back and they said, oh, yes, that's correct. So they gave us approval in 2 weeks. But this is the thing, that the regulators are finally starting to talk.
Yep.
And it's finally, if you can provide the appropriate science, and our biggest competitor in our world in the industry, and I've been doing this water related industries now for 40 years. And our biggest competitor is people that do nothing. If you do nothing, well, I might get a fine. There might be one fine in 20 years and it might cost me $10,000. Why would I put any system in at all? So that's a challenge. I don't know if you're having that here in Australia.
This is current here in Australia.
It's
There
a
is a
very
big
big thing to challenge.
Yeah.
Our secondary challenge that we deal with is those that want to take a portion of what you give them and say, well, I'm only going to do this. And we've got to the point where we refuse to do anything with them unless they want to go and understand the whole science, and we put a system in that's proper, because we don't want to create an opportunity for failures. It's not that expensive based on your return. And the return you're getting is far better for the environment. It's far better for what you're looking at for water reuse and repurposing. And the other thing that we really look at and passionately drive for is the fact that we want to preserve watersheds. We want to preserve the operation of fresh water and not have that impacted. In Canada, we have a group called Métis, which is part Aboriginal and not full-blood Native. And but they have all the rights and the same as the full-blood natives. Of course, the US, they don't have that. Well, I'm Métis, so it's a very big thing for us to be part of this Aboriginal group and look at what you're doing to save the environment. So we really promote that. We develop students with it, but we really are trying to get everybody, this next generation needs to know. And I'm not shocked at your data. I'm so serious that is exactly what's happening everywhere I go. And we're in 7 countries right now with this, and it's the same thing everywhere. This age gap is the 50 plus are saying, I'm going to retire in 5 years. I don't want to do anything and shake that nest up. You got the 30 somethings that are coming and say, we want to make change. They're finally starting to get the jobs where they're allowed to make change. But the younger group are kind of coming in a little bit oblivious, and they need guidance. And I'm hoping what we're able to provide, programs like yours and programs that we're doing at the various universities. And I think collaboration, I was just giving a talk at we're members of the, when you start to get into nanoparticles and you start getting quantum technology, well, we're a quantum technology. So I just giving a talk at the quantum conference there a couple of weeks ago. And that's one of the biggest things we discussed was collaboration. There's no one answer. Anybody who says they have the silver bullet is wrong, or they're full of baloney. We have to work with the university.
In Australia, you can use stronger language than baloney. But I've got a question.
Don't say shit.
Yeah, yes, you can. I've got a question for you here, because with you've got lots of different technologies. One of the ones that you've recently put together is an on-site wastewater system that you've taken through the Canadian approval process. One of the few things that our industry is talking about is how easy or hard it is to get a domestic system through the Australian standard 1546.3 accreditation process. How did you find going through the Canadian process?
Well, it took us about 3 to 4 years to get the technology. Yeah, it was very quick for us. We had to prove the technology out. We had to have it vetted by a university, third-party verified all of the data. We built prototypes. We tested them in more than one country, and all the data came back very similar. So that was all quantifiable data that we could take. And then we involved the regulators right from the very beginning. So our Canadian regulators for federal, our municipal regulators, and also our provincial regulators. So they were all invited. This is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. We will give you all the data before we take it to market. And that was probably one of the biggest helps, because I can give any one of you phone numbers now where you can actually phone them and ask them about that data, and they will tell you. So it's not something, they can't promote a company, but they can give you the facts of what the data.
Were you happy with the process? Where you're talking about, scientific rigor, and you were just saying everything's got to be right.
Yeah.
What did you think of the process that you went through for accreditation?
Well, we're all about the science, so that part really impressed me. But 4 years was very long for me, whereas it might be shorter for other places. But the bottom line was, I feel good about it now. We're actually just taking them, they're being reviewed in Peru right now and Indonesia. So the countries are starting to rely on Canada and North America as being experts in this realm, because we've been doing it for so long. So we're able to take actual scientific data to them so that they can take away a 50-year catch-up point and eliminate that. So I'm hopeful that a lot of these countries that we work with take seriously what we're trying to promote. But again, also look at those that maybe don't have the data and say, come on, guys, you need to have at least a mark or a baseline to work with.
Am I right in remembering, Anish, that you and Sarah have some input into the NSF accreditation in the United States?
Yeah, I run the joint committee right
Yeah,
now,
we're
so
both
we,
on it.
from both of us as a university.
So how do you feel about the NSF process in the United States? Because, you know, there are people who are very happy with what's going on here in Australia, and there are people who are very unhappy. And it's one of these ones, it's one of the few issues which has been discussed in the last couple of years, and there's not too many people sitting on the fence on it.
Well, the biggest issue with standard 40 from my perspective is that the waste strength is a little low compared to what waste strengths are now. The protocol from my
I'm
perspective
expecting the chat to heat up on that one. That's been.
should be updated to more, and certainly, again, thinking about my time I've spent here in Australia and New Zealand, right? You can't hardly find a dual flush toilet to save your life in the US. I mean, I have one at my house, but I'm the only person I know. So our wastewater is getting more concentrated in the US just because people are replacing old toilets. But so that would be my biggest criticism of the current standard 40. And when we look at nitrogen reduction, the nitrogen numbers tend to be a little low compared to what we're seeing now. So I think the protocol and the process is in general good. It's good that we have a national way to look at it, so we're not, but we still have states that are requiring, well, it has to be in our state, and there's still some of those problems, but it helps level the playing field, which is I think what you were kind of getting at. So you have to have a robust process enough, but I think the levels could stand to be up a little bit.
So no pushback from the industry participants on that at all?
You asked me this has not come up at the joint committee, so I mean, it gets talked about, but
You test the concept, I mean, the whole concept of verification is good overall, and I used to be a regulator, you know, I worked as a state regulator, so I could see on both sides. So NSF just sets the stage up, then in the US, at least it's up to the state regulator. So like for example, in Virginia, even in Texas right now, sure, you are NSF approved, that gets you in the state. But then after all, the state can still add requirements to your thing. And ultimately, in my view, it's the public. So your technology is going to work and you will be able to sell more than 100, or you're going to disappear. Because if it cannot be maintained or it's not producing water, especially in state of Texas, where most of these aerobic technologies are used to spray, irrigate. So it's in your backyard, it's in front of you. It's not going to work. The word will fly. And the second developer or somebody is going to build another 1,000 homes, they're not going to buy it. So ultimately the market will go down. So, and in terms of the waste strength, it's a taste facility. I mean, there are some facilities where you can check it out at higher strength or something like that. But the process is the process. And
So where you're on the NSF committee and you run a training facility, you're sewer mining to feed it in, how are you finding the waste strength? I seem to remember you telling me some stories about increasing strength.
Right, so we did run a test because there was this theory in Texas that with low flow toilet and everything, our concentration is going up. How would it affect aerobic treatment? And we found that now it's at the mass loading. The concentration goes up, but the flow goes down. So we verified. We actually ran the technology that NSF approved at the higher concentration, low flow, no effect. We got 30 effluent out of it. Now, the state wants us to repeat that because there was inconclusive, we couldn't find statistical significance because we didn't take enough samples. So now we're going to repeat that whole experiment for the next 2 years. So the state giving me more money. It's like, okay, run as many samples that statistically you can verify. But I personally believe it's a mass loading thing. Concentration, you can give me 300 milligrams per liter, 150 versus, whatever, 600 or something at half the flow. The technology will work. So aeration seems to be fine. And no problem there.
How's this discussion going in the European Union and Ireland?
In terms of testing and accreditation,
Yeah.
I mean, in Ireland, we have our own national standards authority, NSAI, but the package treatment plants, there's a plant in Germany, in Aachen, a wastewater treatment plant, and it has an offshoot, and they're tested there. So NSAI say it has to be verified there, and it goes back to Ireland.
Are people happy with the process?
I know manufacturers think it's kind of very expensive because they have to ship that thing over to Germany. And
that's true of NSF.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
I've
expensive.
heard it's very.
I mean, the whole process I think it takes less than a year. You know, there's always different loading rate regimes you have to have. My feeling is there's a lot less package treatment systems than there used to be 10 years ago. There was a kind of whole swathe of them came through. I haven't really kept up to date with it, but it just doesn't seem to be as many companies around now. Out there, a few of them gone by to buy.
I just want to follow up quickly on Anish. I'm all about mass loading, but those units are rated for so many liters or gallons a day, and there is a mass loading if you back calculate it, but it's still when those units go to market, it's for so you can, I've seen two houses go together and go into one unit based on a capacity and not. So mass loading is something as an industry we certainly need to talk more about, and that's how we should be designing every system.
Absolutely.
But that is not how a lot of them are being spec'd.
Well, in theory, the manufacturers, so we look at in Texas when they're approved, but so now we are asking the manufacturer to put the mass loading as the unit. Then so just don't sell me 500 gallons per day system, tell me how many pounds of BOD is rated, but now you can back calculate based on NSF testing and everything. So once it's the misapplication, in my view, people are using what, okay, I got 2 homes, 250 each, well, I can load it at 500 gallons. No, that's not going to work. So there are a bunch of back things that the public education needed, and that's what I focus in my program, public education. Mass loading is the key. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm keeping it on. Did you want to make a comment on?
Well, purely on that one, I'd probably say that's common. It even went a step further historically here in Australia, which is it went to being marketed by number of persons. This is a 10-person system. This is a 12-person system, and that could mean a variety of things depending on. And like you said, unless you choose to drill down to the mass loading, which is what it should be based upon, it's very hard for consumers to understand what they're getting, and some local council or county regulators also, it's hard for them to interrogate because they've got the certificate, they've got the certification, and it says 12 people. And the influent load is definitely a very, very hot topic here. And there's varied opinions. We have done a fair bit of sampling of influent, some of it random grab sampling, which is a bit of a mixed bag, but also some influent sampling of step effluent at a sewage treatment plant. And we were definitely getting BODs, in the sort of high 100 milligrams a litre, and CODs well over 200, definitely nitrogen over 100 milligrams a litre TKM. And that was auto sampling over a long period.
Right. Yeah. So that's another thing in terms of mass loading. People can just say BOD, but what about nitrogen?
Yeah, and that's another big one.
That's another part of mass loading.
Right. So one of the things, Ted, where he's putting in some questions there, Ted's always talked about the grey literature, that there's data out there that isn't well shared. And one of the things that Ted's been chasing is people who've been sampling in Australia untreated wastewater characteristics. So I haven't seen you publish any of that. It's probably picked it up for your own.
No, this is for clients, and it's a frustration of mine too, because a lot of our, again, I'll get myself in trouble, but they know I'll say this anyway. I work for a lot of water utilities that are in Australia, for those who don't know, are government-owned corporations that are technically obliged to return a dividend to the government and operate a profitable organisation. So they tend to lock up the data that we collect on their behalf, and they don't. There's certain organisations that will share the data, and there's others that won't. And
so as somebody who's out there collecting the data and actually having a look, how do you think the Australian standard is at the moment compared to what you're seeing?
If I have to be honest, and I say I think it's reasonable. I think those concentrations, if you take that back to low based on the flow, because the flow is just a nominated number from AS 46.3. It does actually list the masses in grams, and if you take them back to your Metcalfe-Eddie type grams per capita, they still line up. And there's a reason they still line up, and it's because they haven't probably changed a great deal. It's
Human waste.
It's the 50 years that Sarah was talking, first edition of Metcalfe-Eddie coming through, those low strength and all the rest of it.
So
there's a few messages which have come up there. Man, you'll never work again. Look at that.
So I think, in my opinion, certainly the TKN and the BOD, we are consistently finding they're higher than they used to be. For sure. And so
So question for Richard. Richard, you have your hand raised. Would you like a video feed or a microphone to ask it in person? It's your choice. Let me know in the chat window. I see Ted raise his hand.
That's raised his hand as well, so,
Okay.
Okay, Richard Flynn is in Ireland. He's a good friend, I believe, of Lawrence's. And his question here is, should we be using flow meters to determine the load rather than minimum daily figures, i.e. 150 litres per day per person? Oh, that's a logical question. And it kind of is in response to one before that about NSF standard 350, etc. And that actually the volume of water per person has gone down over the last few years. So
Let's get back to mass loading. That's the problem.
So, is Ted able to ask his question there where he's raised his hand? Has that one come through?
yeah, that was his question. Well, it wasn't a question, it was more of a response to what you were saying as well.
Yeah, another project which was put in the public domain was with Yarra Valley Water, where we calculated back mass loadings from, so we had smart meters on the wastewater discharge, and we grabbed sampled once a month for a year, and then we knew the actual occupancy of each dwelling, and we calculated that back to grams, and that is available. It's, I think, pretty sure it's downloadable, but it's certainly, it came back in similar range to the Carpenter type numbers.
Exactly. So in terms of, like, for example, I go back to Texas. So in Texas nowadays, there's a lot of RV parks. Because all of a sudden there is a boom in RV industry. So we have no regulations on RV, how to design them except the flow. So state wanted to know what the concentration is. And because the designer said, okay, what number should we use? And what we proved that it's about 600, which is a little different than individual home. So it is definitely high concentration. Even though it's low flow, it's a high mass loading. So that's why state is not going to.
The only other comment I want to make about some of this discussion is we have to remember that an individual decentralized system, the flow number we're picking is a peak loading, not an average.
Right.
So when we start talking about the WRF study, that was homes averaged who are actually on municipal water, which we could talk about how relevant it is. And I mean, I completely agree flows are going down. But I always say to people, their system needs to work the day they have 20 people over for the holidays. It can't back up in their home. So we have to think about peak versus average, and both of those should be part of our design thought process, but we really can't design an individual home based on people, because what happens when the next family moves in? I mean, so we're usually looking at mass occupancy of a home, but so whenever people start talking about putting flow meters in, I'm all for actual flow data, but then you have to include safety factor into your design. So a lot of our regulations built in the safety factor. And so if we want to start sharpening the pencil about flows, then we need to think about mass, and we need to think about what those peaks look like.
Chuck Hass and Chuck Gerber did an interesting study in Utah, and it doesn't come up much in the on-site wastewater world because it focused in on the grey water, but yeah, average of 17 people per house, and it just threw the numbers right out and all the rest of it. And I'm not going into why that happens in Utah. We're going to pause briefly so that we can start Lawrence's presentation. So
The only point I would make while we're switching over here is we always have the discussion as it relates to on-site, but in the state where I am hosting this from, our wastewater treatment plants regularly have brown tides because they can't handle peak flows or peak weather events. So, you know, it's apples and apples.
oh, you don't even have septic tanks, Dendra. You got 90,000 cesspools.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate recycling, but we can talk about that later.
Does that work down there?
There you go.
Well, I know in Alberta, we're 23 cubic meters per day. Anything over that, you had to actually get approvals. As a,
It's 4 cubic meters a day here in Queensland.
yeah, it's quite a bit different.
So Dendra has requested that we have a brief bit of silence so that she can put a break in the recording.
So I didn't do the share screen. I think we were already on.
Yeah, it's on share screen.
Yeah, I think you shared your actual PowerPoint. Oh, that's great.
And put it from there. And people see it.
Jake. So we've got Professor Lawrence Gill from Trinity College Dublin. He's a little less jet lagged than Jerry because he flew in yesterday. But getting a view from what's going on in Ireland and the European Union, we've missed this in Australia for years. So
yeah. Okay, yeah, thanks. I don't know if I can give a view of the whole European Union, but I can certainly talk about Ireland and more particularly the type of research that we've been carrying out in Trinity College Dublin. So I'm Professor of Environmental Engineering. I'm involved in quite a wide range of research. I suppose most of it, I just think about how to introduce myself. Most of it is involved in how contaminants move through the environment, mainly in the water. I used to do a lot in air pollution, but now it's all about kind of catchment hydrology and hydrogeology. But one area I've particularly focused in on has been on-site wastewater treatment, and it's all been done at field scale, and then we develop a lot of numerical models to make predictions to improve the processes, or what contaminant loads get to the groundwater or get to surface water. So I'll just give a sort of flavour of different stuff we've done. First of all, just a few key characteristics about Ireland itself on the on-site system. So about 1/3 of the country actually is on-site wastewater disposal. So 500,000 dwellings, most of which are septic tanks with soil percolation areas. A lot of those also have their own private on-site well supply, so about half those. So there's a sort of risk there, if you like, of contamination on the human health perspective. But most of the drivers in the EU are more the ecological, ultimately their ecological targets in terms of river water quality, ultimately. So from a geological perspective, we're for a small country, an incredibly diverse range of geology, but in general, the bedrock and the water table is very close to the surface, so we don't have a very deep unsaturated zone. We have a lot of very old rocks and sort of fissured, fractured rock types. So if the wastewater contaminants get into the groundwater, they move very quickly. We have like a lot of karst. I spend a lot of time developing models for karst systems, karst limestone, and so about 2/3 of the country is underlain with karst. So the relevance for on-site is basically by the time the contaminants hit the water table, that it should be as clean as possible. We don't consider that there's any significant treatment in the groundwater from a legislation perspective. And then we have a lot of this glacially derived subsoil, which is very low permeability, which I'll talk about in a minute, particularly in the northern half of the country. The last glaciation was only 10,000 years ago. So the rainfall, it sort of varies from east to west, really. So actually, like in Dublin, we don't really get that much rainfall, contrary to what most people think. But the more west you go, the higher it gets. And you can see our temperatures, we don't get really cold weather, and we certainly don't get very warm weather. So it's quite kind of mild climate, because we get the Atlantic coming in, buffeting the island all the time. And from the legislative process, everything now is really under this Water Framework Directive, whereby all the pressures, contaminant pressures, are viewed on a catchment basis. There's a lot of work by the EPA in terms of, as I mentioned, trying to work out where are these key sources of contaminants, particularly nutrients, and then we're in a phase now as to what can we do about it. So I spent a lot of time working with the EPA, developing models that feed into their overall model of Ireland as to, from the on-site wastewater perspective, what contaminants are going which direction, and in different soil types, how bad are they? So we have this code of practice by the EPA, which is a legislative document that I've helped to develop over the last 10 years. And to be fair to them, that they have, a lot of the research has fed into the numbers. So the EPA have been funding people, but particularly us in Trinity, over the last 15 years, really, to answer certain questions about on-site wastewater treatment, and particularly soil treatment. And so we've been carrying out studies, and then they have use these numbers. So in general, in the code of practice, there's three kind of scenarios. This is for single houses. So you have a septic tank going through the unsaturated subsoil. You might have a package system going through unsaturated subsoil, going to groundwater, or a septic tank with some sort of process construction on site. It could be a sand filter or a reed bed. But the key thing is that it all has to go through the unsaturated subsoil. That's really, from my perspective, the key treatment step that I focus on. And in every county, so in counties, although theoretically you can go straight to surface water, none of the counties allow that. So everything has to go through to groundwater. And so this can be problematic in low permeability soils. So I'll just run briefly through these different areas. So this is different areas that we've looked at. So first of all, contaminant attenuation in the unsaturated zone, development of passive treatment systems. We recently doing quite a lot of work for solutions in houses in these very low permeability soils. We've been looking a lot recently also at traces of human effluent. So again, on a catchment basis, if you sample a river, what percentage of nitrogen or phosphorus is coming from on-site systems versus agriculture. So we looked at a lot of chemical, biochemical, microbiological fingerprinting techniques, and then a few other things which I'll just briefly mention. So as I said, it's all based on field research. We don't do this in labs. So we construct full-scale systems in real people's houses. We probably, instrumented maybe 20 of these over the years. And we have measured, so these tipping buckets here, we have, they use the distributed flow accurately, but we also accurately monitor the flows. So in answer to Richard's question, I don't think anybody produces 150 litres per person per day on an on-site. It's more like about 100, 110 litres on average. So I know there's this business about peak loading. And we instrument these sites. So a lot of the instrumentation, a lot of my focus is really on the hydrology of the unsaturated zone. So all these wires here, these are all linked to different soil moisture probes. So in this site, we might have 200 different probes trying to get a 3D perspective of the hydrology, and then we have samplers of all different depths. So we get this 3D contaminant kind of attenuation going down. A lot of our systems, we look at a gravity distribution as well. So over time, you get the spread of the biomass further and further along the trench, and then we link that into the meteorology. So from that, we develop a lot of models, so finite element type models for water flow and contaminant transport, and then that all gets kind of integrated into these design codes, I guess, for different soil types, and then that has ended up in national policy. So that document you can sort of freely download on the website. So this is what somebody says. I don't know if this mouth looks. Anyway, afterwards you can see some of the instrumentation on the top. And so these are different things that we've been interested in over the years, so particularly this growth of the biomass over time. And from the septic tank effluent, but a lot of organics in there coming out into the soil that develops this quite dense biomass, which spreads the load quite evenly. And a lot of sites we find the quality of effluent down a metre below the trench from septic tanks is much better than if you have a packaged treatment system, because you don't get the development of that biomass and you get much more intense, faster flow down. I mean, I know that's kind of maybe slightly controversial, but that's certainly what we've seen time and time again. So if you do have the right subsoil conditions, our advice is to use a septic tank, not to go for a higher degree of treatment. And so we've also recently been in a lot of work on greenhouse gas emissions, which I'll mention at the end. At the moment, we have a new lecturer who's a microbiologist, so we're digging up a lot of these old sites that have been running for our research sites that we know intimately, and sampling them for looking at microbial ecology, which has been very, in terms of data, it's unbelievable that this molecular biological information that comes back. But trying to link this into the different contaminant breakdowns, so looking at different species of bacteria, different depth levels in the biomass, etc. So this is all stuff we're looking at now, which is fascinating. I mean, it's like I say, it's another world what's going on in the soil in terms of all these different organisms, and then linking it to how organics break down and how different nutrients get to different levels, etc. In terms of inadequate percolation, then so a lot of these blue areas on this map have very low permeability subsoils, so a lot of clay in them, and or high water tables. So theoretically, if you look at legislation, about 40% of the country, you shouldn't be able to put an on-site system on if you're going to discharge groundwater. Now, it's not as bad as that when you get on an individual site basis, but still, there's large areas of the country, and it's well known. So that picture there, that actually from the surface didn't look too bad. But as soon as we start to dig down, you can see this pools of effluent, and that's going straight out to a ditch and feeding into a lake. So we have the legislation, which I think has been based on quite good science. I mean, and I would say that because it's my science, but the problem is it doesn't fit for a lot of the countries. So
Did this make you popular?
well, when I came on this, no, so one kind of solution for small subsurface sites is spreading the load out more evenly, and we've looked at comparing pressurized distribution and drip distribution actually. But that, you know, there's a few sites where that probably would work. So this is modelling the soil saturation at different levels, different times of the year, and the drip definitely helps. But most of the soils that are low permeability are much lower than that. They can't even take the rainfall, let alone the effluent. So I think a big load of research we've been recently is looking at these willow-based evapotranspiration systems. So what they are is basically an empty basin. So we dig out the soil, put a membrane in to seal it, to protect effluent going out, but also more importantly, the groundwater coming in, because invariably these sites you have very high water tables. And then we have gravel and backfill, etc. And then we grow these willow trees, which have high evapotranspiration capacity. And, you know, there's a source of biomass there also from a sort of circular economy perspective that can be used to burn. Now, the issue is that blue line is the water level. So ideally you don't want it to be at the top. It should be throughout the year below the top line. But the way we size these currently is that we do get some overflow, but it's really kind of rainwater runoff. I mean, we've tested it, but to EPA, this is it's an effluent, and so it should go to ground. The problem is the ground can't take it. So we got these new systems we just constructed in the last few weeks, where we're kind of partially covering them to get rid of more of the rainfall. So I'm just briefly summarising some of the stuff we've done. So another area we'll be looking at is on a more catchment basis or groundwater basis, how can we quantify what the impact is of on-site effluent? So we were looking at a range of different kind of compounds that are, you know, associated with human effluent and not. I mean, agriculture is the main other threat, and I think by far dominates in terms of if you look at the rivers, it's mainly agriculture really from a nutrient perspective. So there's a lot of different stuff that, you know, some things like pharmaceuticals, caffeine, which they're expensive to test for. We've been trying to look for, well, maybe not here. I mean, what you have in your lab is like, we have one of those machines in the whole island probably, but then we've recently been actually used looking at a pepper motile virus, which is, so we did a lot of work on COVID actually in urban wastewater, and they reference everything off this pepper motile virus. So in peppers, every time we use pepper, there's a virus in pepper, so it comes through us. And so our recent work is looking at that now in on-site, looking at how it goes down through the subsoil, and that's really is quite easy to test for. And so that's a recent thing. And then, like I say, I work quite a lot of catchment scales, so that's and springs. You know, what comes out of karst springs, how, because, you know, the effluent goes down much more quickly. Now you can identify these things, but it's the next step is how do you quantify how much does that equate to in terms of, say, the nutrient loads? I mean, like you can pick up artificial sweeteners at quite low concentrations, but, you know, what does that mean? So I just I'm almost finished. Another thing, I know, it's been quite not controversial. There's been a lot of high people on-site assessors in Ireland really want this to come in. Is currently we still use a falling head percolation test. So we've been testing out constant head permeameters and then trying to convert our legislation, our current numbers, into what that means in terms of the which are basically falling head tests into this new permeameter type tests, and come up with conversion figures. So hopefully EPA might take this up because it's a lot more rigorous and it's a lot quicker test as well. So that's something we've just been doing. Sludge production, that's a project we've just been finishing. You know, it's well known in Ireland, people hardly ever desludge their septic tanks. The EPA were recommending once every year, which we think is far too much. So we did lots of stuff, testing lots of septic tanks around the country, quantifying the sludge build-up, how much it breaks down in the septic tank itself, and come up with more optimized times for sludge treatment. And then the final thing, which I spend a lot of my time now doing, both on-site wastewater and also more kind of wetland systems, is more on the greenhouse gas production. So we're measuring carbon dioxide, methane, also nitrous oxide coming off both the systems, but more so the percolation areas. etc., using these different kind of chamber methods, and sort of trying to quantify that, and then coming up with methods whereby we can try to reduce, particularly methane, say from the septic tanks, coming up with kind of devices that we can try to reduce. Because the problem with the methane from these types of scenarios is it's very low concentration, which is tricky to remove. So
Jay, can we have a quick look at what the chat and Q&A questions are? Somebody.
I have it on my phone too.
Well, that's
The only new one, it was from Troy. Final comment, peak flows and peak loads are key reasons why on-site decentralized systems are likely to fail water quality expectations. Over-designed and under-designed systems are both serious problems.
Well, that's our challenge. That's what we do.
Yeah. Oh, Anita had her hand up and Dendra asked, what is your question? So there.
So
So if you would put your question either into the Q&A or into the chat window.
Oh, those are under questions.
No, I think you're done with
depending on where people are in the world, it's getting late at night.
I know, I know.
Particularly where they're aware that a recording is going to be available. So to be fair to Anish, we'll start off his discussion. We'll have our few seconds of silence.
Yeah.
Head on from there.
Yeah, we'll make it quick.
Yeah, and with Sarah's birthday today, we've got to go to the pub.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, let's just put it on.
Yeah, well, while you're getting ready for the next presentation, just to remind you that both Richard Flynn, who's a guest tonight, and Lawrence did a pretty lengthy explanation and a discussion of the infamous perk test and the falling head test. And that, I believe, included Jim Kele from Arris Water. Will be on the same recording channel that this one will be. So.
Okay, so Ben, thank you again for inviting us here. And when you said something you're passionate about regarding water, of course, problem solving. That's what we do. So that's what I've been doing for last 17 years, 30 plus years. We're going to talk about it a little bit real quick. I'll make it quick. I'm with Texas A&M right now. But before, let's see, does it go?
Try again.
Okay, all right. So I've been in this industry since November 1989. 34 some years, been in public sectors, started at WVU, West Virginia University. That's how I got involved in the septic. I worked for the state regulations for the Virginia Department of Health. I also try to, and now I'm back in public sector, but you see in between there's gaps. So I try to dabble in private sector. So I was a consultant for a while to the city of Gloucester, did the national on-site demonstration project. And then I work for a company called NCS Wastewater. So I can spend days talking about everything, but we're going to focus today only on Texas. And that's what I do now for the last 9 some years. So in Texas, we call this thing OSSF, on-site sewage facility. And my whole work is focusing on trying to move this Texas on-site sewage facility to one water reuse facility. So we're going to change the world. Right, Sarah? We're going to dominate the world. They will dominate the world. And I have extensive research and education programs. That's me working in our center there. We have, before I get there. So Ben came to Texas last year.
Yeah.
And he
apparently I made an impression.
I know, he did. And I was like, wow, we thought Texas was big. Ben said, no, you haven't in Australia. That's why I'm mainly here. It is, Australia is big, of course. And what Ben put over there, I'm like, oh, wow, Texas is small. But if you are in Texas, this is what we see. So according to Texans, we are the biggest thing in the United States of America. That's right, the Minnesota or something like that. So we have
Few puddles.
That's right.
Lakes.
That's right.
That is how Texas.
This is how Texas is United States of America. So go figure. And until I went to Texas, I didn't know this. So this is kind of fun fact. And Texas has the second highest number of on-site facilities in the United States of America. First is California. We've got about 2.3 million. And we are increasing every year by 40,000. The state issues 40,000 more permits every year. So We are there. At Texas A&M, we have a team of researchers. We got Dr. Wolf coming to the conference. And I'm also part of extension, so we do teach people and everything. So I got a bunch of team members. These are my 4 primary team people, and I have a bunch of grad students. And so at A&M, when I joined A&M in 2014, my task was to take this center and make it reusable. And this is what happens to on-site system if you don't maintain it. So the center was not maintained. My predecessor left. There was no mechanism. And people said, well, you're part of university. Why didn't university? University doesn't care. This thing has to be self-supported. So we got to work, and of course, I'm not going to play the video. I put together a team, we renovated it, and now we have international visitors in our center. So there you go. That's Ben and Tony over there. That's right. So we got visitors from all over the world coming there. But we have a 2-acre facility, which is outside A&M campus. A&M is in College Station, but we're in Bryan, Texas, which is about 20 minutes out. It's a 2-acre on a 2,200-acre campus, but it is totally dedicated to us. We renovated, we now do research, bunch of things. Interesting fact about Texas, the way we run the research. And if you have an on-site journal, you can look this article up, but we call it Texas model. Way back in '87, the legislature passed a law, and we call it $10 bill. So every time a permit is issued by the locality, they collect $10, they send it to the state. And the state used to collect this fund, and they were funding research till almost 2017. They stopped funding research. So we went back to they stopped funding in 2011. When I joined A&M in 2014, along with our on-site association, we went back and legislature reapproved the law. So now we're getting the $10 fee back. And A&M is getting all the funding. So far I got about $1.2 million came back to my center. That helps pay the bill. We call it TOGP, Texas On-Site Grant Program. We finished our first research in 2021, and reuse was one of the things. You can download those from our website, OSS website. We're just finishing off the second round of funding. Just before coming here last week, I was submitting my report. Bunch of things going on here. We submitted the report, and now we're going to finalize those reports in January. And we're starting another project, 2-year cycle. So this is a 2-year permitting fee-driven research program. And while Sarah is trying to figure out the national research need, in Texas, we got a group of 6 people. They define the research, and they get input from whoever they listen to. And they said, oh, do this. So one of the projects I just finished, because in Texas, they want to know how you can magically reduce their flood quality from on-site system. Because everybody wants to build small drain field. In Texas, we want large homes on small property. So we came up with some ideas about use of greenhouse and things like that to vaporize all those things. So very interesting thing going on here. Besides research, we do a lot of education, and homeowner education is the key. So we do 2-hour program just for a conventional septic system, what not to do and all those things. And Ryan Gerlich does that. There is a 6-hour certification program. So in Texas, if you are a homeowner, you're certified by A&M program, you can inspect your own aerobic unit. So we teach that. We bring people in the classroom. Now we are doing online. So it's a fee-based thing. I also teach professionals, 2-day, 16-hour high spin, where we have to design a restaurant system and RV systems and things like that. And that program, we're going to put it online also, which is, we break it down in 4 modules each, we'll give you 4 CEUs. Texas is all about continuing education unit for our licensed professionals. There are 45 or 5,000 license holders. They do this every day, and they all need some units every 3 years. So we do that. Young generation, as Sarah mentioned, we're all going to retire. So from 2017, 2018, and 5 years, about 7 years, I ran this program where 70 young students, undergraduate, they came in summer and they worked with us to help them understand how the aerobic system works, how to collect water sample and everything. And some of them, actually, I hired one student to work for my program. So he was really into it, and some of them said, I want to go to on-site internship. So we are changing a little bit at a time. So there's some statistics. They came from, 70 students were accepted. They actually got paid to work with us. 130 applications, 22 universities all over the world, and this year was my last batch. We have capstone, so we also have fourth year, our seniors, they do capstone program. So we have partnership with Cuenca, Ecuador, and they have a lot of decentralized small community system, 35 of them. They are not working, so we take one community every year, and the kids kind of design the repair system. And I asked them, like, the students are giving you solutions, are you doing anything? And they said yes. So this was our 2019 project where students actually go, and this is their flow reactor and tanks and everything. We train them how to solve the problems, and they're finally repairing it with the wetlands. So this is the Cuenca utility folks coming to us like, hey, help us teach this thing. So we are changing some minds over there. What are our ultimate goal? This is what I see. Right now, all of our water infrastructures are single use and they're rain dependent. At least in Texas, what we think is we're going to have multi-use, so basically reuse, integrated reuse, not on a city scale. There are a bunch of cities are now direct particle reuse, so they have plants already ready to go. When the next drought comes, they will have direct particle reuse. So we're trying to do that for single family home. And we're trying to integrate that with the rainwater harvesting. And that's the talk that June is going to, so he came up with this model where we take rainwater harvesting, use it as an engineered buffer, trying to dilute the waste. And then these are big tanks. So we're looking at 1 to 100 ratio. So 300 gallons per day home system, 30,000 gallon rainwater harvesting system. And June is going to talk more about it Monday, a week from today, in Perth.
I've got a sneaking suspicion that Ted's going to talk to you about it tomorrow.
Oh, there you go. So we can start talking tomorrow. So June will give you more about it. So in summary, we are very busy. And I don't know about you guys, but Onsite in Texas is booming. For my person, the thing I've been earning living out of this industry for the last 34 years, and I can't stop working. So,
which year in the next 5 years are you planning to retire?
I wanted to retire yesterday. But I feel this is retirement, seriously. And when you're enjoying what you're doing, and it's like, wow, I'm getting paid to do this, I'll keep doing it. So not for next 10 years. So I'm there, but we are, one more thing. I was asked, and this is a challenge from a bunch of us we met. So we're going to start a OneWater certification program next summer. Since my REU program ended, we developed a curriculum, 6-week program for fresh graduates and consulting engineers. So start thinking about OneWater. And WEF is going to co-sign certificate with Texas A&M. So we got Bob Rubin is one of the instructors. So we put together a 6-week very solid program. We're going to market it. It's not free. So if I think our break-even point is 20 students, and if 20 students come to us, we'll offer it next year. So with that, I'm done.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Jake, can we have a look at what fresh chats and questions have come through? Thank you very much, Jake.
Hey, you're welcome. I did it, right? I talk fast.
So
Oh, you're perfectly.
congratulations on the homeowner education from Richard Flynn.
Thank you.
There are several programs out there. We do one, Nara does one, Nara does a couple of them. The biggest concern is how do we get that actually in front of homeowners? It's not that the materials aren't available. It's just, as you know, we've had a couple of interactions recently with different stakeholders and with different groups of people, and the level of misinformation and just not knowing what an on-site system is and what it can do and what it can't do is staggering.
Yeah.
And the other point I'd make is, I'm so excited to see a young people coming into the industry, because I'm looking around the table and reminding my board chair there that I've been trying to retire for the past 2 years and he won't let me. We are.
But I won't be luck next year either, Dendra.
Oh gosh, well, yeah, but if we get the grant, that will be exciting, and I'll stick around for that. But the wealth of knowledge that we need to be sure is passed on, recorded and passed on. And, you know, we've all been in the business for 20 odd years. The volume of stuff between us that we've accumulated is something that absolutely has to be accumulated in one place.
We're antiques that talk.
Right. So, right, as Sarah mentioned, most of these things are gonna be in the cloud now, so Laura has an online program. We do ours is more Texas specific, because Texas is very unique state, so it has to be done through. So, in the succession, so I look at my own program as, is it gonna be there after I go, right? So we have a plan, so there are people behind me, so they're getting trained as we speak. And when they're ready
Do
to
you
take over,
think where the photo in your presentation where you basically inherited an on-site wastewater
right,
training facility which had been let go because there was no handover process? Do you think you're focusing on that?
Of course, yeah, that center has now planned for 25 years, 30 years. And with because we can't rely on funding, so all this, so I'm using this as a business model. So we generate so much revenue, and this is the revenue that will support this activity in the center.
Oh,
But-
really?
But for that to happen, you have to have a required certification and training program. So both Minnesota and Texas, the reason why I have a job is because people are required to be certified in continuing ed.
Education.
So if you
How
want,
many of the 50 states have that requirement?
I think we're about
Virginia has it.
it's half to 3/4.
Yeah.
I mean, and again, almost all the big population
Big
states have it. And even like I picked on Michigan, but California actually doesn't have, like, it's all jurisdictionally driven.
Right.
There's like a standard of practice in California, and then it's
But
jurisdiction by jurisdiction.
Yeah.
So even certification,
Yeah,
so,
there- So many different factions there.
yeah.
There's 4 factions you have to get through at a regulatory standpoint. With, you know, the Army Corps of Engineers have a say, the municipal has a say, that everybody has a say in water treatment there. And the closer you're to the ocean, the more that say gets.
Right.
Right.
But I mean, if you wanna build, you know, and cause people are always like, well, why can't we train more students? Well, that is another, then you need to have research funding. The reason why we get to have students is because we have grants to fund students. And so if you're not funding research, you're not gonna train that level of professionals. But then we're talking about the practitioners, which is a whole nother group. But I mean, to me, if there's anything that moves a state forward or a province or whatever, a country, it's having required education and continuing ed, because then you have the opportunity to set a playing field for what does it take? It's not just a backhoe, right? And then how do we keep moving the industry forward? It's new ideas, right? And continuing ed.
It's interesting because Lawrence and I were talking about it earlier that there hadn't been a lot of changes in how wastewater was treated. I mean, you had your facultative lagoons, which they still have, and in many places you've got standard septic systems. And, you know, it opened up memories back to the 70s when I was installing those of what it was like. But now that we're doing the research and then the background, and, you know, like, the kudos to your groups and teams that are doing this, because it's critical to what's gonna be the next stage. And dealing in a high plasticine based clay material or high bedrock material, there's challenges that you don't have with high sand materials, perforatability, right? So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. One more comment on education. I mean, I went through schooling I got my master's and PhD in the US, never heard of septic system, because I did not learn anything in college. Okay? It happened to be, I ended up in small close in West Virginia University. That was about septic systems. I learned everything while doing it. So my point is, sure, everybody says, well, nobody's teaching on-site system. Well, they're teaching wastewater. We teach wastewater engineering. So maybe there's some of this, and it's marketing. To me, like, okay, we've been doing on-site wastewater, well, let's call it something different. So we're trying to go into this one water program. And homeowners want to make sure their homes are protected, their property is protected from drought.
Well, we'll make one comment, and this is kind of something along the lines of what you mentioned earlier, Sarah, is that when people say water treatment, everybody thinks drinking
Right.
water.
Yeah.
Nobody thinks sanitary water.
Right.
It drives me up the wall, because I 100% agree with your statement earlier that they have to work in symbiotic relationship with something.
Absolutely.
And especially now that we're going to reuse.
Absolutely, and to me, reuse is gonna kind of now homeowners in charge. And now, when you talk about municipal reuse, you worry about PFAS and everything. And I tell people that, wouldn't you rather drink your own treated wastewater instead of drinking everybody else's treated mixed wastewater? And people say,
That's a whole different internet search.
I know that. So then, because then you are control of what you're putting in, you control your wastewater quality right at home, so this is public education.
I think terminology is very important. I know Bob Segrist, who I worked a lot with, he was very insistent, we need to normalise some of these words, things like soil treatment unit, not percolation area.
That's right,
And then we always about disposal, whereas to me it's recharge,
Yeah, that's my four-letter word is disposal.
Right. STU, that's Bob Segrist.
Yeah.
So Ben, what's your view of the discussion we've had here today and how what's going on internationally compared to what we've been talking about in Australia, or how you found the Australian industry?
I think, in a negative way, comforted by the fact that there's some pretty common themes, I think. So the big one being this whole issue of the young people coming through. So as someone who runs a very small business, probably the size you described, none of them come out of university with any knowledge of on-site systems of any kind, unless they've probably done a couple of degrees dotted around the country, and then they might have done one undergrad subject. So then, I tend to invest maybe 2 to 5 years training someone, and then often they'll end up leaving, not for bad reasons, often because moving or there's just life goes on, and they often go out of the industry. On the other side of the coin is, I think, Jerry, your sort of statement rings true for me about my company is almost always competing against the do nothing option. That's all universally our competitor. It's very rare I'm getting matched in front of a regulator or a board saying, why should we invest money in the project as per your proposal versus this competitor? It's almost always, from what I can tell, if we don't do this, no one's going to do anything about it. So why would I invest this money?
So there is a comment or a question from Stephen Holler.
Yeah, so there's a question up there regarding testing of technologies. Are there any advantages of field testing on actual home installations?
And he's with Reovation?
Yeah.
So
So
there with that? Reovation?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
I tend to be a bit of a sticky beak on whatever technology's out there, and I sleep poorly. So in the middle of the night, I will look up this stuff.
Right.
So, but it's a perfectly valid question.
Right.
But the drama is there is such a difference between homes
Correct.
that the number of installations that you've got to put in
It's
to make it, scientifically significant. So yeah, that's the whole reason why a sewage treatment plant, whether it's in Germany, whether it's an NSF facility in the United States, where did they make your test in Canada?
Well, they've tried to bring in a couple of new ones, which nobody's going for. They're trying to get it to fall under the CMEC guidelines and stuff like that now. And there's what they call the TVT test, technology verification programs. And everyone has so far failed, but they want to put this stamp on it.
yeah.
So
In Australia, our testing facilities at Harndorf down in South Australia, it's a small village, but it's very similar to what you're talking about in Germany, very similar to the NSF accreditation facilities. And the whole reason people have gone that way is that there's so much variation between,
But I
specific on-site
There
systems.
are a couple states that require field verification. I mean, I think there is an advantage because testing is not the real world, even though it's a protocol trying to mimic real world.
Yeah.
But it's from a financial perspective. I mean, the only other thing about NSF is they do have an auditing program. And if you're selling NSF units, you're supposed to be audited to do
Give the
some
consistency.
verifications.
So-
I don't know if that is international though.
With the states that have got the field verification testing program, how many installations do companies have to put in?
So I have a personal example in Virginia,
Yeah.
because Virginia is a prime example of field verification. The Pureflow, the Irish peat moss company. When I started in Virginia, they were the first one, right?
They ran out of peat.
Yeah, they ran out of peat, so they are.
But
But they're successful, they were the first one to do successful thing, and I think the way the Virginia, see, there's a chicken and egg, right? So company said, well, we know this thing works, we would like to sell it, if you allow us to sell it, we can test it. So when I joined the health department in Virginia, the state gave them 250 permits. So they said, okay, here you go, you can sell it to 250 homeowners, basically.
Somebody made up an arbitrary number.
No, there was statistical set. So the 10% of it, 25, you shall test very thoroughly. And then which one you pick? So that's where the local, because we have to involve the localities because they have to buy into this. The local health department, the company and the homeowner, they agreed. And then they said, okay, we'll test this. So they were the first one to finish this protocol. And that became protocol through which all the media filter, because the NSF, this is before NSF would test the media filter. And they were very successful. Pureful is now cocoa here, right? Instead of meat.
I know what you're talking about testing. I don't think you're really you're testing the box. You're not testing the soil.
No, we're not. No, we're testing the box.
Yeah, so EPO testing is that's an inherent part of the treatment process.
But what they're asking for is the credit.
No, I know, but I have issues with this test.
I know with our system, it's a physical chemical process that has a releasable water at the outset of the unit itself.
Right.
So we don't use ground percolation for process.
Yeah.
But we had to go through the provincial government only allows so many people to produce these each year.
Right.
So we actually had to be approved as a manufacturer based on our science. And then they give us what they call a variation letter, a variance letter that says that we can produce these and manufacture these based on this stamp from the provincial government. If you're over 23 cubic meters per day, then they made us have to have each identified as an individual site where we could bulk produce less than them.
So you just brought up a whole nother thing, and that's combined treatment and dispersal. So that is probably the biggest thing that we've seen more of in the last 5 or 10 years. That's what we're calling them now. I don't know internationally, but so we're putting something into the ground, usually almost always with sand, and then they're lining it and then they're collecting the effluent. So it's getting closer to what you're looking at, but they're not doing that with the boxes in front of the soil. They're only doing that.
Well, one thing you can do it is very tricky to analyze what's going on in the soil, different depths and expensive and all this. But what you can do, which we do, is you can extend your knowledge from modelling. Now I know you can get a model to do anything, but rigorous modelling can really help extending the boundary. You can have one or two very good sites, and then use that to.
And that was done in
So you've got that. You're the only person in the room who's.
Well, I do a lot. Yeah, I do a lot of mathematical modelling. I mean, that's one of my things. But you don't see much of it on site.
With the 200 sensors?
No, more like 4 sensors and 6 dosimeters but I think the trouble is that you have that issue though with the box, that it then leads regulatory decision makers to just look at the box that has the certificate. When there are, so in Australia, I would suggest it's become very strongly focused towards the box at the front of the system. And I would agree that a lot of the time, what's going to determine the outcome is the land application or land treatment system. And so the trouble is, it's not easy to test that.
So we're heading to the end of our discussion, and we have a few people who have hung in there for almost for the 2 hours. Thank you very much for that. It is truly appreciated. If you've got any questions to ask, type them into the chat box now so that we can get to
That one up there is good,
I can speak to Ken on that one right away. We have a big problem with systems that are remote or portable. In that as soon as it reaches our winter months, now what are you doing with the effluent? So you have to either store and heat or transport to a wastewater plant. If there's whatever you're doing with this, but you have to deal with it. And what a lot of these smaller units were doing was just letting it go into the ground, over the ground. And as I talked about, we had some that they're not proficient enough to give you the quality that you need. So they were dumping sodium chloride in it and then just letting that go on the ground and freeze up in the wintertime. And in spring, nobody notices, right? So climate change when it's cold is really bad. Let you guys speak to heat, but.
I mean, in Australia, I think extreme weather will be the big thing, like the fires is definitely been one that's popped up from time to time. Like extreme rainfall events would be the other one, probably. But so the fires would probably be the big one. I think that the destruction of systems. I think someone mentioned plastic tanks in their presentation.
In Ireland, it wouldn't be, it's the soil moisture, which is always, it's very high, and the predictions are much more intense rainstorms in the winter. So that's going to create more saturated conditions, whip things through faster through the soil.
The biggest thing we're saying in coastal zone is the sea level rise. So the septic system that had 2 feet of separation no longer has that.
It's the same line.
So this is
Water table's so much
shrinking,
higher.
water table is going up. And so now upgrade, I mean, that's good to.
Well, I was gonna say, but in they're predicting our soil temperatures to get warmer, which is actually better. Yeah, so climate change is a very, it's complex, so it depends where you live, how it may impact you.
Yeah, there
So
was-
some areas are getting drier, some areas are getting wetter, like so I think that's a very hard question to necessarily answer. My overall thing would be, if you think about climate change for wastewater as a whole, wastewater treatment, when our systems malfunction, the malfunction is smaller and shorter. So if we're talking about extreme events, like as Dendra brought up, it affects all wastewater treatment. Ours is a much more localized, small issue as opposed to catastrophic, open up the pipe and let it go, millions of gallons. So to me, that's an advantage of is that our malfunctions, and every system can malfunction. Doesn't
So
matter.
resilience is the big thing with climate change, right? So decentralized is obviously more cost effective than the resilience. You can shut down this much and repair it while everybody else is served. So City of Houston, and they're looking at this because they had a hard time putting water in people's home because their water system got flooded. Well, guess what they're using? It's small decentralized water treatment system, water, not just wastewater. So
Yeah, there was a webinar on Friday, I don't know if you sat in on the New Zealand Land Treatment Collective, where they brought up one of the challenges they had in response to some extreme weather they had in the North Island was actually the rate at which the regulatory authority could approve systems to replace the destroyed systems, that they just couldn't physically keep up, and people had no sanitation for an extended period of time.
That resource.
Yeah, it was just too hard to physically get through the process.
That's one thing we should mention. New Zealand is doing much better with their on-site decentralised community than what we are
Yes.
here in Australia.
Yeah,
And
in terms
if
of-
nothing else, that's a national disgrace.
It is, it's a sign, because I've been to that conference.
Yeah.
More than I've probably been to an Australian conference.
I think Lawrence brought up something earlier too, which I thought was rather good, because it's the first time I've heard it in a while, and it's been really frustrating me that there's a study done back in the 90s by a British professor that was looking at the influence of cutting off groundwater tributaries. So wetlands that feed other wetlands, everything else. Now, where I'm from, the groundwater level has actually dropped dramatically. And it happens to me every year. I used to have a pond that's 18 feet deep, 5 meters deep, and every time in the wintertime now, I have to refill it for 3 weeks in the spring because it's dropped over 2 meters. But what they've done is they've gone in and built new subdivisions, but nobody's taken hydrogeology into effect on moisture level of the soil, how you're transmitting your water from site to site to site underground. You know, everybody's worried about what's on top of the ground. And I think we need to understand it because it's a holistic approach.
It's very much built into the Irish good practice, the whole soil hydrogeology, that's the key characteristic.
Right.
Actually, what dictates whether you can get, it's not so much what you have up front, to be honest with you, it's
Yeah.
more the capacity of the soil is like.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the problems I have on the eastern seaboard, New South Wales in particular, is that a lot of the research and also understanding is built around either connectivity with an aquifer or no connectivity. We have a lot of situations where the main pathway for effluent from the drain field will be along shallow rock, and then it'll move either through fractured rock or along soil and discharge into surface waters. And people's understanding of that connectivity is pretty varied.
Right.
So they either think it's going all the way down, or they think it's
Evaporating. That's my favorite one. It all evaporates. Like, you know where I live? No.
Even in Australia, it's like where I live, Newcastle, we have 400 millimetres of rain, and almost everyone has rainwater tanks because it's been mandatory for a long time now to put them in for toilet flushing and laundry, and so there's not actually a lot of beneficial reuse demand for the wastewater you're generating in unsewered property, but the trouble is land application and land treatment's become a dirty word because everyone wants to maximise reuse. And it's not that reuse is a bad thing, it's a good thing, but if you're spending a fortune trying to reuse treated effluent when you've got 1,200 millimetres of rain falling on
Right,
you,
water, right.
there's questions about while you're doing it. So, and Ted kind of was, he's raised some questions here around that where we've found working with water utilities that there's a sweet spot with economy of scale that's still decentralised, but it's more like, you have 500 houses where reuse becomes a bit more viable. But the trouble is water authorities are probably not geared up to do that work. And in Australia, they're the people who legally have the ability to be a responsible management entity for that type of activity. Right. So the system's not really built to encourage efficient decentralised reuse. Correct. But realistically, it also sometimes gets pushed to the point where it compromises sanitation outcomes in some country towns. Where people push so hard for beneficial reuse, they end up killing projects by cost. So in the meantime, people have to continue to put up with untreated sewage in their drains. So again, it's complex.
Well, Jake, thank you very much for hosting us here.
Thank you.
This isn't really your field. You're much more into drugs in wastewater and all the rest of that. What did you think of the discussion? Apart from being somewhat sad and Debbie Downer.
It's just me in general, obviously. But just messaging Richard, there's things that we can do because we have access to, as I showed you before, samples from all over our country we've archived for over a decade now. So we're looking at 40,000 samples in our specimen bank. We've specifically collected them during censuses. So then we can also calibrate models for stuff. And so, for instance, I just pulled up a paper that we published a few years ago that you probably aren't aware of, where we were able to calculate based off 20 million people approximately on census day, 50 grams per day per person VOD, 120 grams per person per day COD, 250 litres per person a day flow, 7.7 grams ammonia, for example, stuff like this. But there's probably other indicators that we could go back and measure that would be useful for you, and standardizing stuff.
You make me feel a little bit better for you having to sit in here and listen to this. Jake, with what you've done.
I got a little black book, I made notes.
I gave myself a point every time Lawrence took a note. Yeah.
That's a good idea, because that might help us check what was written in 60s and 70s. That's how those studies were done.
Some of the infrastructure's
Are they taken from decentralized systems as well?
No, this was based on wastewater treatment plants across our whole country.
Decentralized, but
But then I was also thinking, there's also lots of stuff that we can do in terms of indicators for leakage of systems, or that might actually help you better with point sourcing or age potentially, because some of these sweeteners, for example, are super stable chemicals.
Yeah, right. No, I'd agree with that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, part of that too, I think with the grey literature, which you mentioned, Ben, is if we did try and re-establish some sort of way of getting together and sharing knowledge, I think it's a lot easier to do that. Yeah, a lot of my clients are willing, once they know they're contributing to something, they tend to be, but when they think that.
See you tomorrow, Ted.
I've been trying hard. So there's so at the University of Minnesota, there's someone who's from across the US gathering she told me I'm gathering samples of all of basically the manure across all the animals. And so they're like the clearinghouse for all, and she's having I'm capturing all of the poop. And I go, no, you're not, because you're only doing animals. Because we have there's across the country, when we look at flow and waste strength data for commercial, it is worthless. It's all from the 70s. All of the references are old. And we have a few examples of more recent, but for the most part, we are using antiquated data. And I said, what if we had a clearinghouse that would gather that information? It would be a great thing.
Well, it's interesting that someone has commented about spray versus, different types of utilizing of water. I was in Indiana a couple of years ago, and they had just come out and said, well, we're not allowing any more surface spray. We're going to do 9 inches below ground injection only. And then they had just banned that because they're close to water bodies. You have to be so much distance between the receiving water, and that otherwise you could have that migrate into your receiving water. And then biggest thing they're looking at was Honestly, pharmaceuticals involved with hog farming was a big one, things like that. So there was all what's getting into there and where's that going?
Right.
So, you know, the whole matrix of ag operation is changing around us as well. And just managing manure, trying to treat manure when you got a wastewater system and you're using some form of a chemistry process. I mean, there's no charge left after the first stomach and all that digestion process versus dealing with waste material from a pig or from chickens, you know, and again, now you're talking about high methane, high nitrate values, things like that. So it's the whole dynamic is now coming down to some science, which is thank everybody at this table for participating in it. It's really changing.
Well, thank you once again for attending. Hopefully we've not bored you to tears, and that as part of a tentative step into stakeholder engagement, we've actually engaged you and interested you in what we're discussing. If you're able to make any of the rest of our events, be it Woodford tomorrow, Clare Valley later on this week, the conference over in Perth, please do share emails. Yeah, drop us a line, whichever way you can. Let's keep the conversation going and see what we can get done. And yeah, now we need to go put alcohol into Sarah for a birthday. So thank you very much. We'll be in touch.
Thank you.